bonjour à tous. Bienvenue à ceux qui nous rejoignent pour la poursuite de cette belle, excusez-moi, il y a un petit Larsen. J'enlève mon casque pour le moment, c'est mieux comme ça. De cette belle nouvelle édition de Paris Mat pour parler d'éolien en mer, composant de la souveraineté énergétique. Et pour...
We're talking about the wind turbines at sea. In just a second, we'll be right with you. We have Martin Johnson. You are technical manager, consulting engineer for everything on wind technology at Sedgwick, an insurance broker. Mathieu Bonnieux, you're strategic deputy director for interconnections at RTE, and Claire Genot, you're head of marine and transport at SFT Verlin. You spend a lot of time with Total Energy, precisely dealing with these issues. So thank you for all four of you for being there. So the energy component, or the energy sovereignty, wind, offshore wind power, is this already a significant portion of the energy mix? Well, we first have to define the terms before we get started on the subject of this. What is offshore? You have floating windmills, you have those that are anchored on the seabed. Can you give us a description? Yeah, you have floating wind turbines and those that are anchored. It's in fact two different systems. When the wind turbine is actually anchored on the seabed, it's usually not very, rather shallow waters. But when you have greater depths, then you have floating platforms. So in principle, it's the same object. It's a wind turbine, but the design is completely different, because when you lay down a wind turbine on the seabed, it will not move. Of course, it had to withstand currents and waves and wind, of course, but it remains stable, and so it's pretty straightforward to design. With a floating windmill, necessarily, although it's anchored, but even if it is weighed down, it will move, and quite a lot, in fact. And so that's the sort of thing that needs to be considered. Having said that, when you certify that kind of unit, basically the certification pattern is pretty much the same. But in terms of design for the safety, it will be quite different. Yes, and let me show a little slide. There we go. No, that's not the one I had in mind. Sorry. Oh, well. Oh, dear. No, that was not the one I needed. Well, gives you a foretaste of what's to come. Now we've got the right one up there. So, Bureau Veritas, you are in charge of certification and classification of windmills and your wind turbines, and so you work with those who design these things. You were saying early on we can't get too involved in the technical details, but still, it does make a difference, doesn't it, in terms of certification, whether it's floating or lay down at the bottom of the seabed. Does it make a difference in terms of how robust these things are? No, really not, because designers are pretty much concerned that whatever the model, it will be resilient. It will, so you won't need to worry about the reliability or stability. Now, what is the difference is to how you go about making it safe. Of course, it's more challenging for a floating setup. Right. So that's basically what we're dealing with. Now, the name, here we're saying that offshore wind energy has a strategic role to play, but in practical terms, how much of the energy mix is it? How many wind farms are there? Mathieu, maybe? Yes, and good afternoon, everyone. Now, energy sovereignty assumes a sort of a holistic vision. For electricity, 95% is decarbonized thanks to nuclear energy and ENRs. That's all very well, but electricity only accounts for 25% of the energy mix. We have about 60% of fossil fuel energy. We do not produce fossil fuel energy in France. And that's the whole issue, because in terms of energy sovereignty, and also if we want to address climate change. So what needs to be done is to do away with fossil fuels in as much as we can. And that is why we're stepping up, well, electricity generation and consumption wherever we can. So mobility, that is automobile, but also manufacturing, services. If we can substitute electricity for fossil fuel. No, the two options, of course, is nuclear, but also renewables, and that includes offshore wind farms. Now, there are 3 such farms, accounting for 1.5 gigawatt, and the latest one, it's in a pilot floating farm off the shores of Port Saint-Louis-du-Rhône, 25 megawatts. So this is a pilot plant, and the floating windmill technology is rather new. It's but it's gaining ground. And right now, of course, the 95% is laid down on the seabed. Now we are looking at 750 megawatts by the end of the decade in offshore wind turbines. Now, right now, in 2024, we're looking at 4 terawatt hours. And wind power in general, both land and offshore, 47 terawatt hours. French consumption is 450 terawatt hours. So wind power accounts for 10%, and offshore right now is not much yet. But electricity generation was 539 terawatt hours. It means that we exported 89 terawatt hours, thanks to, of course, to the performance of our nuclear capacity as well as renewables. And projecting to 2050, offshore wind turbines, according to latest announcement by the French government with its latest plan, should account for about 20%, 20 to 30% of all electricity generation in France, which is significant. You have to keep in mind that electricity generation in France is bound to grow, and some of that growth will be carried by offshore wind. As we speak, there's a big debate at Parliament, at the French National Assembly, discussing that plan, and Parliament is taking a stand on that energy plan or roadmap to 2050. Anyway, we should arrive at a decision by year's end. All right, so decisions are being made as we speak, and we can see a strong ambition still. France is not best placed for offshore wind power for a number of reasons. What are the impediments, and what is it we can do about it if we want to speed up that development and reach these pretty ambitious objectives, and to be able to be, close to the UK, Scotland, or Germany? Well, we have this energy plan, what we call the programmation énergétique. And of course, each branch, nuclear, renewables, oil and gas, in any case, needs to have its roadmap. And so it is important to have, but in legislation and in regulation, we need to have targets and a course of action. We need to have a clear vision of what kind of volumes we're going to generate. There will be calls for bids. We'll see how many actual projects will start, when, where, etc. So on this energy planning, we have this multi-annual plan called PPE in France. The whole thing started in 2001, so we're slightly behind delay. Slightly, that's an understatement. Any case, we have to say where the farms will be located. And there was a big public debate last year. It went on for 6 months, where the sea, that is offshore, was the issue. And so there was citizens' improvement. And there was a decision in October 2024 deciding on what the most the best areas were on land and at sea. You might ask why on land, because we're talking offshore, but you need to have connections and to be able for the offshore energy to be connected to the grid. In any case, with this first plan, I mean, we have our work already pretty much done, but of course we have to see how the value chain will be structured, because we have people who build windmills, people who build foundations. Do we have harbors where you can put these things together? Do we have the maritime resources to set up these things at sea, etc.? So we have clear issues there, and we were very much uncertain in France as to just how we would go about it. And the volumes varied considerably between 2013 or 2014 and 2023. There was only one call for bids with 600 megawatt hours, and that was it. So you can imagine that means there wasn't much going on. And of course, no industry can survive unless you have sufficient volumes. And there you have a case right there. Well, having revisited the regulatory and legislative framework, and I believe insurers were involved, by the way, because in the insurance code, there was a scheme covering renewable offshore energies called Great Risks. And in fact, insurers were not necessarily happy at the time. But anyway, there was at least more visibility, a clear framework. And Bureau Veritas, I believe, is also involved in the legal aspects of these floating wind turbines in terms of both certification and classifications. We wait for a final ruling of the Supreme Court on that. Claire, Julie, maybe what's about this legal framework that isn't completely finalized? Yes, there's some fuzziness remaining. Right now, farms are either classified or certified, but it's not at the request of the French government, it's the insurers who want to de-risk, and they want to make sure that if they're providing insurance for a farm or a set of turbines, they want to be on safe grounds. So right now, things are pretty much up in the air. In other words, a customer can come in and ask to have for their turbines to be certified, or at least part of the design of a turbine, referring to a certain part of the existing regulation, but not other parts, etc. There's the APER law that is still being discussed in Parliament. With any luck, things will be cleared up, and all players will know just what they need to do once you have clear rules. At least for the certification process, we know exactly what the steps are. At this point, though, this is not the case. Right, so the regulatory framework needs to be clearer, better defined, but you need to have better planning. Claire Genot, are there other impediments that need to be addressed? Well, impediments. Well, by way of preamble, insurance is a key aspect of the building of these wind farms, because here you're talking about wind farms requiring huge investments in terms of capital, the cost. Manufacturing, I mean, even more for floating ones, but even for the traditional ones, we're talking about large amounts going through banks. I mean, some companies have enough capital that they can invest directly, but usually the business model involves a bank loan because of the less attractive profitability compared to fossil fuel energy. So once you have a bank loan, it means you have some sort of hedging, some sort of, and we have to go beyond what some operators, I mean, the sort of collateral, whatnot, can be rather complicated. Can be a rather long-winded process, and so you have to the legal counsel or insurers talking to the banks will define conditions, and that will probably bring about even higher costs. Now, in France, we have fewer natural disasters. We're not earthquake-prone or what, and so that means that the prices can be, the insurance costs could be lower than, say, in Asia or in the US, where you do have more natural disasters. You remember windstorms in the US, and and that can have a major financial impact. Not just in building, but also operations. So you can have operating incidents that, I mean, the incidents can account to as much as 20% of the whole business, and that could be a major impediment in developing a farm. Less so in France because, as you said, we have less exposure to that kind of natural risk. But still, way upstream, we are very much involved. So, but also defining where these wind farms are located. There are areas where, I mean, is that an additional challenge for France? Is it difficult to find? Well, it's not an insurance matter, although we have the maritime coast that is pretty much used as it is with tourism and fishing and whatnot. So more so than in other countries. Maybe Mathieu can say more about that. But yes, that could also be an issue. The actual location of these devices. And in France, we're looking mostly at not floating, but turbines that are laid on the seabed. I think the threshold depth is, I think, 60 meters, depending on where. But so yes, identifying the land. I mean, it can be sea, land, but that's why Scotland, for instance, had maritime areas that were available, and also you have some oil fields that were discontinued and gave way to these windmills instead. Mathieu? Yeah, at sea you have different types of challenges. I mean, there's fishing. That could cause a clash where you have areas, fishing areas, and the purpose of these offshore turbines is precisely to avoid any impact on maritime activities, not just fishing. There's merchant shipping, the merchant navy. You have passenger transport, etc. And then there are environmental issues as well, because some areas are more sensitive than others because they have unique sea habitat, or they could you have wildlife, birds, and such like. So you have environmental issues, and of course all this is taken into account when defining the location of these areas, where the whole purpose is to avoid any conflict of interest or any clashes. Now, you could have, you have an offshore wind farm off the shores of Fécamp, even though there's a natural park right there. You just have to be more careful on impact effects, and then you have special exemptions that have to be granted. But all this is considered as part of the funding, the insurance, because there could be disputes. Now, it is the Council of State, which is our Supreme Court, that is the only body that rules on these issues. So it goes a bit faster, but still, you can see there are quite a few issues there. It's not a particular challenge. It's really just one parameter. Yeah, Claire, you said that there's insurance dimension, and you said that the funding it's usually bank loans. But how risky is it to insure the wind power? Martin, you work with Sedgwick then, and whenever there are technical failures in particular, can you tell us a few words about what are the types of risks you can come across with a wind farm at sea, offshore? You've seen some. Depending on the technology, whether it's floating or laid on the sea, but is there a difference there? Is there more risk for one type of technology? And what's the lifetime of a wind turbine?
We start to address your last question, the lifetime of a wind turbine. I think we will be looking at hardly no more than 25 years. You should bear one thing in mind, that if you compare older turbines with modern turbines, the manufacturers nowadays has better programs when they are doing the development work, so they can, you can say, cut more material out of the design. And we can clearly see that if you compare pretty old turbines, let's say they are 15 to 20 years old, with modern turbines, I don't expect them to last as long as the original old turbines did. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we know that the designers in the R&D department of the manufacturers, because they are all under, you can say, a financial pressure to develop and supply the cheapest possible solution. That's actually what the clients, the buyers are asking for. The procurement department comes with a bag of money, basically saying how many turbines can we get, how many megawatt can we get for that bag of money. And the manufacturers know that. So instead of, you can say, building a very strong construction, they need to shape it into what the market is actually asking for. And there's nothing wrong about that, because I don't think you will find many buyers that goes out to a certain manufacturer and say, I want a turbine with a lifespan of that many years. Build me something very, very sturdy and solid. That's not how it works.
C'est presque une question de...
And so this almost built-in obsolescence going on there, almost, I mean, because there are business considerations there. Claire Julie, do you share that view? I mean, we'll have floating wind turbines whose life cycle will be shorter. Well, our job should be precisely to make sure that with a view to optimizing costs, we shouldn't compromise quality. And so we are there to do as much design work as possible to see that in terms of fatigue and such like, that the life time should be as long as possible. Now, life cycle is part of the criteria in the call for bids. And so usually the specifications, the building specifications are 25 to 30 years. So normally, designers should do just that, look at these standards. And it is for us to see that the windmills thus designed can indeed make it that long. Now, of course, we do this with our existing knowledge, and things may change over time, and maybe some of the parameters not taken into account today will be considered later on. We may find other aspects that might compromise the life cycle of a wind turbine, but the idea is to meet certain requirements. So we said we want them to last 25 years, and we are even possibly extending that life cycle, and additional studies can see just how in practice we could extend that life cycle to go even beyond 25 years. So at least the intention, and indeed our designers, is to try and push for the longest possible life cycle, and we're there to make sure that it's done safely. And well, Claire, then you will maybe be the arbiter here. Do you find there's price pressure that might, with a view to reducing the cost of building? Well, yeah, well, price pressure there is. That's clearly the fact. Is they're always trying to cut costs, and that all. And that also applies to insurance. And depending on the technology and the location, the costs can be very high. And in some projects, can be no longer viable. Less so in France, but definitely in other parts of the world, definitely. Now, there are two key parameters in the cost of insurance. At least, well, there are several items, but one thing is over the past few years, it was a race to the biggest, and so you had huge turbines, and the costs were prototype turbines, and so that had risk, and you had to look at risk appetite, and that translated into prices as well, etc. And the floating turbines also led to questions about the insurability of these projects and certification. So here you're looking at the technology of turbines and the various and the floating, or those that are laid down. We wanted to look at the costs. For insurers, the other issue was cables. because that's where the claims and the problems come from. The main first cause of when the cable is severed, then of course there are terrible consequences for the operators because the electricity simply can't get through. So this is still work in progress for the insurance market. There was a rather limited risk appetite for insurers. Likewise, the labor market is moving slowly, and there are remaining issues as to whether we will move to that sort of business, because in the maritime environment, you also have the major players will be, of course, concerned. But Morten, as I was saying, you are involved in all sorts of claims or problems with wind turbines. If you were to give a classification, what are the main issues? What type of problems do you come across? What kind of failures do you come across? What's the most frequent?
To say all kinds of failures. As you may know, the wind technology was basically developed out of Denmark, starting in the 70s, and I grew up with the business more or less, not from the very beginning, but I can remember when I started to work with the wind turbine business, one blade was 5 meters long. Actually, 2 men could carry a blade. Now the blades are like 120 plus meters, so 2 men cannot carry a blade anymore. And we are getting older, of course, so that's having an impact to that too. Nevertheless, we have a saying in Denmark that the wind turbines are constantly developing new ways of breaking down. And that's what we will see. You can say, you're asking about the floating technology. Yeah, that's unproven technology. And we will see some new development in the way the turbines are failing. And that's pretty normal when you are doing development in an unproved area. And there's only one thing to do, learn from it and do better. But I'm pretty sure we will see some new failure modes coming up. If you saw my presentation, Steph, then you could see some examples of failing turbines offshore. Yeah, that's in Ukraine.
Is it the right one? I keep going? It's not this one?
Yeah, this is a job I did in Ukraine some years back in time. I don't know why they put that in. Take the next one, please. That's some of the countries where I've been working on failed wind turbines. I do actually work a lot analyzing why are turbines failing, what is the root cause, what started this process of events. That could be a nacelle fire, it could be blade breaking off, it could be complete tower collapses, bolt sharing, foundation that basically falls apart and collapses. And also, and I have had a few of those unfortunately, fatal accidents where people are getting killed in work in wind turbines. Try to take the next slide.
All right.
Yeah, that's the first biggest offshore wind farm made in Denmark, and they've had a couple of nacelle fires. You could try to take the next slide. Yeah, it can look like that. Pretty devastating for the turbine, of course, and when something like this happens, it's very important to dig into it and see what is actually the cause for this situation. So in this case, we climbed up the nacelle and started to look carefully into all the components. We like to do that before it's taken down, because when the technicians are working in the nacelle to make the decommissioning, they need to walk around, they need to shift things around, and So we want to have the first impressions up tower typically, and we found it.
It must have taken some time. Is it really difficult sometimes to identify the origin of a failure?
Yeah, it is difficult because sometimes you need to work with a little spoon and a little brush to go through the layers of dirt you find and say, what's that lying directly on the floor there? It's a part of that component. And then you can start to build it up. Basically, as you have seen in the television when they are reconstructing aircrafts from a critical crash, we sometimes do the same, for example, with blades that failed, build them up bit by bit, and then, we got something interesting.
C'est de l'archéologie.
It's like archaeology. Mathieu, you wanted to respond. Well, not exactly to the accidentology of machines. In France, we've got a database about the accidentology of wind turbines on and offshore. And with that, we can also analyze the root causes of incidents and accidents. And that was put in place with the value chain and the government. To come back to what Claire was saying about cables, because yes, this is critical. And that's also the topic here. RT's scope is electrical substation, the export cables to the shore. That's RTE's scope. For the export cable in particular, RTE's doctrine is to bury it underground, really in the sediments, in the subsea underground, by default. So that's really the base case. That's what we try to do for risk reduction reasons, as Claire explained, because sometimes the cables can be caught involuntarily by trawlers or a ship anchor, and also deliberately sometimes because geopolitics sometimes catches up with us. We saw that in Finland with Elektlink. We saw that with Nord Stream on a pipeline. So yes, all that is part of our thinking. So burying cables is what we do by default. We can't always do that. Sometimes the underground does not necessarily allow for that. And in that case, there are protection systems. We use rocks or a protection bed. And that's what we do. It's very important. It adds more safety for RT assets and for the developer as well. But there's also a regulatory framework in place that also protects developers in case of unavailability of the connection infrastructure. In that case, there are indemnification systems. In France, we've sort of copy-pasted what existed in Germany, which has a lot of incentives for us as the grid manager to put things back into service very quickly, but it's rare that we are directly responsible when an anchor gets caught in a cable. But anyway, we use the necessary resources and means, and so we've got strategic stocks of power cables and contracts with our cable manufacturers in order to repair a cable quickly. And I think that this is also something that the insurance world needs to think about in a world with more and more uncertainty. Even with growing geopolitical uncertainty, we'll also need to think about mechanisms possibly for solidarity, or at least for risk pooling at the European level, so that we can be a lot more resilient vis-a-vis these aggressions, which are bound to happen more and more frequently compared to what we can see in Europe and in the world. I wanted to come back to what Mathieu was saying precisely. In the insurance package imposed by lenders, more and more, almost systematically, there are sabotage and terrorism covers that are mandatory and that make projects more costly because of the cost of insurance. And in countries, lenders can impose some war risk covers, not just sabotage and terrorism. We saw that there are multiple risks. The cost of a project is quite staggering with a lifespan. We don't know whether it's going to be shorter. Is it complicated to insure offshore wind and find funding? It depends when and where. Historically, the energy market covered this risk. The maritime market is now covering it more and more, with the Scandinavians who are the first on this sector because they're used to offshore. Historically, they'd already been dealing with offshore energy. So there were the big P&I clubs or the big insurers from Scandinavia who made a major entry on this market. Before that, it used to be the London market or the Asian markets mostly, because don't forget that 50% of installed capacity now is in China. So, of course, Chinese insurers are involved in a major way on these topics. Talking about floating with a gigantic turbine, yes, it gets very complicated. Well, sometimes, as soon as prices are high, you can find that there will be a bit more co-insurance. If you've got leaders with a very high initial price, of course, that's going to attract people into co-insurance. But there are rare cases, but that could jeopardize the viability of a project where the economics is already very tight. So yes, that can be a problem. But then for non-floating, this is a more habitual market. There are already big players. It takes a lot of work. It's a work in progress as well. So insurers follow the markets. All insurers have CSR and or ESG policies in place. Those who help oil and gas are trying to transition to renewables, but we can see that they don't know the market well enough, with quite a high level of accidents and claims. So they could be reluctant, but there's some substantive work to be made about technical work, and certification, of course, is going to help, so that risk management by the market is better, so that risk is better perceived, and so that there's a better equilibrium between prices and the occurrence of losses, to make sure that everybody can meet their own decarbonization goals, because that's really key. Claire Julie, certification is your business. Can that help manufacturers better convince insurers to go for that? Well, absolutely. Our goal is to de-risk these designs as much as we can. Well, of course, you can never get to zero risk, but the earlier we are involved in the project phases, the more we're able to de-risk projects as they go along. For certification, as I said earlier, the client can choose what type of the process they're going to certify. We're also involved in a given class, and in that the process will be more end-to-end. We'll follow every step in the process, of course design, but also manufacturing, materials certification, those that are used. We'll monitor installation, inspections during the lifespan of the unit, a whole package, so to speak, to try and reduce as much as possible these risks. With inspections during the lifespan of the unit, the aim is to ascertain if there's a problem before it starts deteriorating, to try and anticipate breakage, so that we can predict that with inspections. We try to push for that as much as we can for such a scheme that will cover the entire lifespan of the unit, to try and limit risk as much as we can. So, Claire, you reminded us that the occurrence rate is quite high. Morten, I wanted to ask you, we saw a list of the countries in which you were active with operations worldwide. You've got a fairly comprehensive view of offshore wind worldwide. Can France be inspired by best practices, technically speaking, in construction or maintenance of turbines? Where do we stand? Are we good or not in this country?
Well, I have done a couple of jobs here in France, and I was actually surprised to see, that's actually a good beginning, how interested the service crew that was maintaining the turbine was in knowing what went wrong. I've seen other countries where they don't really care, but here in France, they played a big role in both assisting but also looking over our shoulders to see, is there anything we can learn here? I was very happy for that. Concerning, you can say, France and offshore, Well, if you compare with Denmark, Sweden, Germany, Holland, the UK, we are lucky that we have some pretty shallow water around that makes it easy to install wind turbines. Here you may have some deep water situation, but also rocky seabeds that actually takes installation of wind turbines to a new level. And I'm pretty sure that the floating technology will be the one to go for. And then we'll need to see in the future, when they are installed, when they are in operation, how do they start to fail? Because fail they will. It's only a matter of time. It's not asking if they will, it's just when they will. And then starting to make the statistics, starting to analyze what went wrong? Could we do this better? Yes, of course we can, but we need to pay attention. But you cannot really do that deeply enough before you see what fails. That's the typical situation I have seen through my whole career, from wind turbines starting in the 22 kilowatt size. Now we are starting to speak about 25 megawatt. So new subject will constantly be coming up.
Ça va changer pas mal. Mathieu, vous vouliez...
Yes, Mathieu, you wanted to respond, and maybe to give you a few orders of magnitude at the European level. Offshore wind in Europe is about 35 gigawatts of installed capacity. In France, we've got 1.5 gigawatts. We're at the beginning. Offshore wind players are very European. Project developers are. There are a few French ones and Europeans. They are the ones who submit bids to RFPs, and they already have a foreign presence for some of them. So I think that it's important to remind ourselves that this is an industry that is very European. And the first installed farm was RENDEZ-VOUS in Denmark. It had a lifespan, a life cycle of 27 years. It was installed in 91 with technologies that are not the same as what we've got now. And so just a clarification, in the RFPs that developers bid for now, they base their assumptions on 30 to 40 years lifespan. So wind turbine manufacturers now certify their equipment at least for 30 to 35 years. And then indeed, depending on the good health of the facilities, the lifespan could be extended if applicable. But right now, these are the hypotheses that we've got on the table for new projects. And by the way, the government has extended the concession for the maritime public domain, a possibility of lengthening that to 50 years, also including the development, installation, and dismantling phases. So we're talking about lifespans now of 30 to 40 years and not just 20 years anymore, as we initially thought for the first farms that were awarded in France in 2012 and 14. That's very clear then. So great room for progress, but a wind of optimism is blowing. This is now the end of this discussion because our time is up. Thank you so very much to the four of you for shedding light on the matter.